Karibu sana Judy.
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you for everyone that has shown up here today. Our topic today is Beyond Matanga, and we're going to talk about the journey towards integrated healing. So I'm aware that some of us were not able to join last week due to technical challenges. Our deepest apologies. But I hope that some of you were able to catch up with some of the things that we talked about. Just to mention that we really honed in on the neuroscience behind grief as well as the systemic aspect. So we looked at the individual as a system as well as the family and the community as a system. We also were able to look at the different roles that the deceased played and how that affects grieving, as well as some of the roles that family members assume and how it could predict or affect the grieving process. So today I want us to start with a reflection on the iceberg of loss. And just as we did last week, I want to start with a reflection question. And my question to you, which you're free to write if you have a writing material, if you're comfortable writing in the chat, please feel free to write, but you can also reflect on it. But I want you to think about the person that died, your loved one that died. And I want you to answer the question, when this person died, what did you lose? When this person died, what did you lose? So with that, and we'll check in on the responses for those who would be willing to share at some point in time. But allow me to begin here. So when a death happens or a loss of a relationship happens, on the surface, we see the primary loss, which is the actual death of the loved one or the relationship that has been lost. So if you're talking about a relationship, a friendship, we normally call that an ambiguous loss. Yeah? Because the person is alive, but you're perhaps inaccessible to them. But if it is a death that has happened, you're not able to access this person physically. So on the surface, what everyone sees is the actual death of the loved one. But beneath the surface, just like this iceberg, there's so much loss that has happened. The thing we call secondary losses. So there's loss of daily companionship and routine. If perhaps the person that died was your spouse, and you've spent perhaps a year, 2, 10 years, 15 or more with this person, then you've lost a companion. If the person that died is your child or a sibling, there was perhaps a routine that informed your relationship. Perhaps the times that you would call each other, if it is a child, perhaps as a parent, you'd wake up, prepare them for school, or drop them to school. But when they're dead, that routine is lost. There's some adjustment that needs to happen there. There's also loss of financial security if perhaps the person that died was the primary breadwinner. There's also a loss of an envisioned future. If it is your spouse that died, if it is your sibling, if it is your child, there are dreams that you had for them as well as with them. There is the person that you hoped they would be. If it is your companion, you hoped that perhaps you would have retirement together, perhaps enjoy those moments together. But this one is that envisioned future, that dream, that hope is cut short by the death. Last week, we honed in on the identity, the self-concept that is lost when a death occurs. And yeah, that is true because you now move from, if it was your spouse, you move from being a wife or a husband to a widow or a widower. If you are caregiving, then you no longer have that role in your life. So that interpersonal identity is distorted. There's also the loss of social status or physical home. We talked about the systemic vulnerability, especially where some spouses are inherited based on certain cultures. But where there's property scuffle, we see that perhaps a family that was able to, were really high on the social status, are able to be demoted on that status. Perhaps the widow and the children are left with nothing. So that one is also lost. When it comes to healing or processing your grief, we not only mourn the person that died, but every other thing that died with them. Yeah, so as you think of that question, think about the secondary losses. What did you lose? Yeah. There are also misconceptions that society has put forth that prevent or hinder how we integrate our loss psychologically. Remember the 5 stages that we talked about by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross: the denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. There is a belief that grief is linear, that's how it will go, that we move from denial to anger to bargaining. But as we've mentioned here before, grief is nonlinear. And these 5 stages, as we shall see later, are merely observed coping mechanism. But it's not a prescription for how one will go through their grief, how someone will survive after the death has happened. There's also an expectation by society that grief needs to have an expiration date, that once the funeral and other burial rites are done, that the survivor should then move on, that they should stop mourning, that they should stop grieving. But grief is a lifelong process that requires integration. The yearning that comes with a death, the yearning that comes with the loss of a relationship, can last for years. It can show up, it can sneak up on you even years later. There's that psychic, whether it's the mental torture, whether it is the emotional, yeah, that shows up years later. There is no expiration date. You cannot say, oh, it's been 10 years now, so I stopped grieving, I stopped feeling some type of way when my loved one is mentioned. But the society in Kenya, our collectivistic society, as well as other societies out there, they make grief to be a private burden, in that when people express their grief emotions, they are perceived to be weak. In fact, when you start talking about your grief to people who've not experienced it or who are not going through it, they tend to isolate you. They're like, you need to move on. You mean it's been 1 year, it's been 1 month, you're still stuck up on that. I think you need to move on. So what this does is that it makes people bottle up their grief reactions, bottle up their emotions, their thoughts when it comes to grief. And this would lead them to bottle up either the trauma or the emotions and the thoughts that come with grief. And remember, when you bottle up, just as we talked about last week and the demonstration with the bottle, what happens is you're making your body to stay in that state of existential threat. You remember the existential threat that we talked about? So the 4 Fs. And if you forget anything about this workshop, please remember the 4 Fs. So your body gets stuck in fighting, fleeing, freezing, and fawning. Yeah? But what really helps in that psychological integration of a death or a loss is being able to vocalize what you're going through, is being able to communalize this, because community can both be a risk factor when it comes to grief, but it can also be a protective factor in how people heal and move forward. Yeah. So we've always mentioned the stages of grief by Kubler-Ross. I think even before this workshop, we all knew about it. So the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, and acceptance. But this is an old paradigm that Elizabeth came up with when she was working with terminally ill patients who were facing their own mortality. So they were facing anticipated grief, you know. So for terminally ill patients, there is an understanding that healing will not happen. Yeah. So this is the 5 stages that Elizabeth observed they went through. But what this paradigm suggests is that grief is something that is passive, a process that happens to the bereaved and not something that we actively do to be able to heal and process our grief. So in the modern times, we see a shift from the old paradigm to the 4 tasks of mourning by William Worden. So the first task is to accept the reality of the loss. The second task is to process the pain of grief or to express the pain of grief. The third task is to adjust to a world without the deceased. And the fourth task is to find an enduring connection with the deceased in the midst of embarking on a new life. So grief is something that should be treated as active work that requires one's commitment, that requires an individual sense of agency. These tasks are not sequential. It doesn't mean that you will accept the reality of the loss as the first, as the first thing or as the first task, but you could start there. You could also start at processing the pain of grief, and that's why that image looks that way. Yes, and these tasks can be revisited even in years to come. And it requires that the griever finds a sense of empowerment. By going through these four tasks, they get empowered. They get a sense of hope, reestablishing that sense of agency that they had that grief might have distorted. So I'll look at each task a bit more moving forward. So when it comes to the first task, accepting the reality of the loss, it requires acknowledging both intellectually and emotionally. When it comes to processing the pain of grief, it requires one to confront the schmas of pain. So that is the physical pain, the emotional, as well as the behavioral. When it comes to adjusting to a world without the deceased, this is three parts. We need to adjust externally, internally, as well as spiritually. And finally, when it comes to finding an enduring connection, we need to embark on a new life while maintaining an ongoing bond with the deceased. So something we call continuing bond, which I shall also mention more in a future slide. So first task, accepting the reality of the loss, requires someone to move past both the intellectual awareness and into the emotional truth of the death or the loss. So on one side, we have the denial or the disbelief that comes with a death. So you find that an individual knows, but also doesn't know that the death occurred. And this not knowing is quite unconscious. Because in the course of the day, you'd be moving around your business and you know that, yeah, my dad really died. My sister really died. My spouse died. My child died. But you'd find yourself, perhaps at night, reaching out for them in your bed. Or you find yourself calling them, not deleting their number, calling them. And then at some point you realize, oh, so I just called dad, but yeah, he's not here. So that's knowing, yes, but also not knowing. There's also a process of mummification where we see a lot of people retaining the deceased's possessions exactly as they were. So it's like we are freezing time. And this is just the brain's way, the mind's way of denying that this loss really happened. It's a way of coping. So you'd find that a room that belonged to the deceased is just as it were before they died. No one touches anything. The valuables are not touched. The room is kept clean. And it's like, yeah, they're still here with us. But what happens when we start moving to the reality and accepting this reality of the loss, we find that people really struggle and they go to selective forgetting to be able to cope or buffer the impact that comes with the death. So you'd find people blocking the visual memories. So perhaps you're going through your gallery and then you come past a picture of the deceased and you swipe really fast or you stop looking. If it is perhaps a video, currently we all or most people record, the burial process. So you find that whenever it starts, we switch it off or we move past it. Yeah, we are not allowing ourselves to go there because it's too threatening. It's not, yeah, we're not feeling safe going there yet. And other people will tend to minimize the relationship that they had with the deceased. It's like, yeah, we weren't even that close. Or other people have lost an entire family. So what is this one loss to me? Like death happens. So minimizing your loss. But for one to get to acceptance, we need to have certain rituals. And these rituals start at the funeral. Some start even before, perhaps visiting the morgue to see the deceased severally before they are buried, doing the funeral, playing your part there. And then in future, holding memorials for them, perhaps celebrating their birthdays, the important dates, if it is your graduation and your parent is not there or your sibling is not there, finding a way to even keep them alive in your graduation. And this is a gradual process that will eventually lead one to be able to go through that painful realization of the absence of our loved one, especially as we navigate daily routines. The second task, processing the pain of grief, it prevents an individual from, getting into complicated grief or getting into prolonged grief disorder. So on one hand, we have avoidance, which looks like something, this container that you see that has a fluid that is boiling, but it has been closed. Just like that Coca-Cola bottle that we were talking about last week, that is being shaken. And then when you eventually open it, it explodes. So what happens when we actively avoid? And remember, this can be conscious as well as unconscious. Remember the 4 Fs. So fleeing can be avoidance. So anytime a reminder comes about the deceased or any topic about death, we avoid going there. We don't want to deal with that, so we are running away. But it can also occur as freezing. So what happens is when we actively avoid, then we find ourselves coping maladaptively. So maladaptive coping is unhealthy ways of coping. And you'd find that some people would engage more in substance use or abuse to just be able to get into that freeze or dissociate or flee from the whole situation because it's too threatening. You'd also find other people being excessively hyperactive. So if it is a young man, even a young woman, you'd find that they're very aggressive towards others. If it is a couple and perhaps they lost their child, you'd find that there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of fights, quarreling, but also just fist fights. And you're wondering, okay, what's really going on? Other people would seek geographic cures. So it's not like you're going for vacation and welcoming feelings and thoughts of grief when they come. But the room that we talked about that is still mummified in the house. So when you start feeling, remembering the deceased or having those thoughts, you immediately book a vacation. You go on vacation. You go to Karura, but not to process your grief, just to escape or just to flee from that environment that reminds you of the deceased. But you also find people having thought-stopping procedures. So procedures to block, those painful as well as positive memories that are related to the deceased. So some of the thought-stopping could be like if perhaps you are working and then you start thinking about, or something reminds you about the deceased. So you call yourself for a meeting, you're like, hey, Judy, I will stop thinking about him. I will stop thinking about her. And remember, we talked about grief being also gendered. So if it is perhaps a man, they, shift. We are stopping the thought, so we are burying ourselves deep into work. And sometimes it could also look like substance use. Or whenever I think about my loved one, I will take that alcohol. I will go smoke. I will start masturbating. So all these are ways of stopping thoughts that are related to the deceased. But on the other hand, we can choose to process, exercise our self-agency in processing. And that means going through the physical pain, which includes hollowness, breathlessness, feelings of fatigue, as well as the emotional, experiencing depths of sadness, experiencing pangs of anger, a lot of anxiety, but also the relief that we were talking about that could result into a lot of guilt. Perhaps the deceased died from a terminal illness that brought financial relief, that relieved the caregivers. So allowing yourself to also feel the relief. If you feel relieved, it doesn't mean that you're not sad. It does not mean that you don't also experience moments of anger. And because that relief can be stigmatized, people might block it from, or block themselves from experiencing relief when it comes. But there's also this cognitive pain that could be experienced as confusion. So if you're having a conversation with someone, you'd perhaps notice that they're telling you a story, but they start here in Nairobi, kidogo kidogo they're in Mombasa, and then they went to Kisii, and you're wondering, okay, chill, where is this story really going? So there's a lot of confusion mentally, and it might also show up in how we work. So someone tends to lose things. It's like they're present there, but they're not. Others could experience hallucinations. But there's also this yearning, this deep yearning for the deceased, especially on the important days, and there are days that it would hit harder than others. What happens if we choose avoidance over processing is that we tend to delay our grief, and it will catch up with us. And before it catches up with us, we tend to experience mental health challenges, such as depression, that could be delayed, as well as psychosomatic symptoms. So, psychosomatic, as I mentioned earlier, is mental health challenges presenting as physical health challenges. So you find someone is sick, they go to hospital severally, but there's no illness that is being found. And they wonder, okay, what's really going on? And then in session, when they come to session and you track the patterns of this psychosomatic illness, you find that it started after a death that they locked up. So moving forward to the third task, that requires us to adjust to an altered world. This requires restructuring across 3 domains. So the external adjustments that need to take place could include the roles. Remember, we talked about the deceased playing certain roles when they were alive. And if they were the overfunctioner, perhaps the provider in the home or the person who was enabling certain things to happen, perhaps the connection in the family, when they die, then someone else needs to step into these roles. So if it is perhaps a sibling that you lost, it might require the sibling that is left to step up into some of the roles that the deceased used to undertake. If it is a spouse that died and then the remaining spouse is left with a child, then perhaps they would have to assume the role of a single parent. And that might mean learning new skills. So if perhaps the remaining parent was the primary breadwinner and the one who died was the caregiver, then the remaining parent needs to also learn the caregiving responsibilities. There are also internal adjustments that need to take place. And this is mostly related to one's self-concept. Remember we talked about a person's sense of identity or even self-esteem, especially when it was tied to the deceased, being distorted after a death. There's a lot of who am I questions. Who am I if I'm not a wife? What does it even mean to be a widow? You mean I'm a widower, so what does that really look like? If it is a child that was orphaned, perhaps the person who died was their only remaining parent. So what does it mean to be an orphan? So who am I now? But remember, I mentioned that when a death happens or when a loss happens, a person's self-efficacy, your ability to be in charge of your life, to be in control of your life, to influence how things are happening and not just letting things to happen to you, that sense of self-efficacy or self-agency is distorted. And there's this helplessness that also occurs. And you'll find that some people tend to regress into older patterns or even older stages. So if it is perhaps a young child and they had stopped urinating on the bed, then you find them regressing to that earlier stage. If it is someone who was walking perhaps a journey of sobriety, you find them going back into alcoholism or substance use, and then it is really deeper than it was before the death occurred. So we need to restructure this to get back to that self-agency, to be able to shed off the helplessness. But there's also a spiritual adjustment that needs to take place. Remember, when a death happens, and perhaps someone was or is a person of faith, they're very stoic in their faith, and they were really praying to God to show up and heal the deceased, or to even prevent the death from happening. And then the death happened. And you're having your religious leader always telling you that, I am seeing a life full of prosperity, good things will happen to you. So they're not talking about the other side of life, the pain that we experience as human beings. So you're always expecting God to allow good things to happen to you. So when a death occurs, you're kind of left wondering, okay, so what does it really mean to be a Christian or to be a Muslim or to be a person of faith? But when this death occurs, it shifts how you even see God. You not only see God as a being who allows good things to happen, but a being that also allows the bad stuff to happen, you know? And even in Buddhism, as well as people who practice mindfulness as spirituality, one of the noble truths is there is suffering. And suffering is death, it's illness, it's pain, it's heartbreaks. So there's that. But for us to be able to move forward, we need to have this spiritual restructuring, understanding God in a different way from perhaps what we knew Him to be. And then the fourth task allows us to find or emotionally relocate the deceased person as we move forward. And that does not mean moving on or finding closure. Let me burst your bubble. There's no closure when it comes to grief. You cannot say, oh, it's 5 years, now I've moved on. No. Something might happen after 10 years and it will hit you as hard as it hit you the first day. So what happens is we need to move forward into a new life by finding an enduring connection. So in the past, we saw that there was a lot of preaching about decatheting or cutting off, that emotional energy that was spent on grieving or mourning, and moving entirely into the future without thinking about the dead, and to reinvest in the living. But the modern concept talks about the concept of continuing bonds. So how do we emotionally relocate the deceased? How do we create space for the deceased in our lives? How do we maintain this ongoing, transformed relationship that is not physical with the deceased? How can we keep their memories alive? How do we find rituals that allow us to emotionally relocate them in their lives? And there's a model on continuing bonds that I will touch a bit later. But as I was doing this research, I came across this quote that really resonated with me. A grieving person is going to laugh again and smile again. They're going to move forward, but that doesn't mean that they've moved on. I recently saw something trending online where the widow of a former politician was apparently spotted out hanging out with the girls. And it was away from Kenya, and people just dragged her through the mud. Like, what do you mean she's having fun? So people tend to expect when one is bereaved not to experience, the emotions of joy, moments of happiness, not to dress up and look good. If they do that, according to people who are less informed, that means they're not moving forward. But you will experience those moments. You will have good moments, but that does not mean that the grief will not show up. It is a lifelong process, but that does not mean that you do not get to experience moments of joy, moments of laughter. So when we talk about the journey to integrated healing, yes, there is the 4 tasks that need to be navigated continuously across life. But there's also this dual process that needs to be happening as you're navigating the tasks. So the 2 processes are oriented towards the loss. So there's work oriented to process the loss, but there's also work oriented to restore the individual's functioning. So when it comes to loss-oriented work, the focus is on confronting the grief directly. So some of the actions here will include sitting with these grief emotions, perhaps crying, sitting with the sadness, being able to regulate these emotions, remembering the deceased. Are we perhaps having memorials? Or when it comes to their birthdays, what do we do to just celebrate them? But also allowing ourselves to feel that intense yearning, you know, looking at those photographs. If it makes you cry, then it is okay. But that is part of the loss oriented work. On the other hand, we have the work that is geared towards restoring one's functionality. The focus is to allow the person to adapt to their new reality, the new reality without the deceased. And some of those actions include doing household chores. So perhaps, the way I was alluding to, perhaps the caregiver having died, then that forces the primary provider who was perhaps providing financially to be able to assume some of these caregiving responsibilities, which might also require learning new skills. It also would lead one to laugh with their friends, spend time with their friends, perhaps going out, watching a movie. Yeah. So a lot of work actions that allow one to be able to restore their functionality. And it doesn't happen that you only focus on loss oriented work and then when you finish that, you go to restoration oriented work. No, it oscillates. So you could be crying, you could be washing utensils because perhaps that's what the deceased used to do, and then you start crying. So you're doing both. It's an oscillation. And this is a natural process. And sometimes if you tend to move forward, doing the restoration oriented work, there is guilt tripping that might happen. Why are you watching a movie and enjoying it? You know, and that can disenfranchise your grief. So it is okay to distract yourself. It is okay to step into the pain, process it, as well as allow yourself to step away from that pain in order for you to survive. And remember, immediately after a death, we are mostly surviving. We are not thriving in that moment. So, as I mentioned, there is the continuing bonds. So, we are not cutting off our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions about the deceased, but we are moving forward by carrying them with us. So the goal is not to forget the deceased or leave them behind, but be able to integrate the death or the loss into our newly reconstructed identity. So how can I still be a sister even though I lost my sister? Perhaps this was your only sister, or you are an elder sister and you do not know any other role apart from protecting your younger sister, and they are no longer there. So how can I integrate that loss into my newly reconstructed identity? What I do with my son, because initially after my dad died, I noticed he really struggled. He was 4 when my dad died. So when we would go somewhere, he would see cars that would remind him of my dad's car. So he would say, "Hey, mom, I want to go say hi to grandpa." And I would tell him, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's not grandpa." And he would like really push that conversation. He'd be like, "Why are you stopping me from going to say hi to my grandpa?" You know. So with time, I just found myself having conversations with him. So how I choose to allow him to carry my dad forward with him is at night for bedtime stories, I tell him stories about my dad, stories about my upbringing. And when he asks questions about grandpa, how grandpa died, where grandpa is, I'm always there to answer them because I want him to grow up knowing grandpa so that he can also move forward by carrying him with him. So some of the strategies could include creating personal rituals, and this could be independent from, the communal ones that we talked about, the funerals, those burial rites, and perhaps some of those cultural procedures that follow even after a death. So how can you establish something that is unique to you, that allows you to continue moving forward with your deceased, relocating them in your life emotionally. And I remember my therapist telling me that you need to schedule time to grieve. And it's a very cognitive, behavioral type of therapy thing. But every Wednesday at 3:30, I would actually excuse myself from people, because that was my time to actively, intentionally think about my dad and see to the emotions that would show up. And what I've done moving forward is on his birthday, I will light a candle. If my family members are around, I will invite them and cook my dad's favorite meals. So you can also do things that are unique to you that would allow you to continue moving forward with your deceased, So it could be lighting that candle on their birthday. It could be listening to their favorite music. It could be going to Karora and journaling about them or to them, writing those unsent letters to them. Even doing audio journaling where you just record yourself talking to them and informing them, okay, this and this is what has changed. Yeah. And there's also this part of turning your pain into purpose. Initially, the story about your grief will be something we call problem saturated. It will be saturated with a lot of pain, a lot of the problems, a lot of what you've lost. But eventually, you would find a way of retelling this story in a way that gives your life meaning. And how that could look like is finding a purpose with the loss. In that, you perhaps would do work or even spread awareness when it comes to grief, or supporting other people that are grieving, or even reducing the stigma around grief, And if someone is in therapy, because I know there are therapists on this call, but also for you when you go to therapy, the goal is not for you to cut off the deceased, but for your therapist or the therapist in the call to be able to allow you to shift the relationship with the deceased from one that is physical to one that involves an enduring memory and an internalized love. So allowing you to do the work to be able to move forward by carrying the deceased with you. So yeah, when do you seek clinical help if you're going through grief? Because we talked about the different types of grief, and there's the acute grief that a lot of people can be able to get through without the help of anyone. There's that uncomplicated grief, but there's also complicated grief. Perhaps you've suffered a death this week and then another one happens next week. We had someone on call who lost their parents like in April and the other one in May. So how do you differentiate that this is acute grief, something that I'm able to carry and work through, but when it comes to this other end, here I need help. So when it comes to the typical acute grief, we find that the pattern differs from prolonged grief in that the grief emotions, the grief comes in waves. There is intense sorrow, but it also oscillates with moments of relief. But for prolonged grief, we find that the grief is chronic. It is very persistent, and the separation distress becomes quite unyielding. With acute grief, what happens to an individual's self-image or that self-concept? We see that someone is able to maintain that sense of self-worth, their self-image, as well as self-identity, their self-esteem. But with prolonged grief, there is this profound sense of meaninglessness. Like, so why are we even living anymore? There's loss of identity. Like, we really can't find ourselves without the deceased. And it endures for a long duration of time. There's that self-blame, the guilt that comes with perhaps the things that we did not do, the things that we thought we could do to maybe protect or prevent the death from happening. In terms of functionality, with acute grief, we find that people are able to gradually re-engage with work, show up in, their relationships, in social settings, they're able to do their daily tasks. But with prolonged grief, we find that someone struggles with a significant amount of impairment. They struggle showing up at work, they struggle socializing, they even struggle performing their domestic tasks. And timelines can also help you differentiate between, is this just the typical acute grief or uncomplicated grief, or is it graduating into prolonged or complicated grief? So you find that with acute grief, the symptoms will be most intense between the 6-month mark to a year. But for prolonged grief, the symptoms become way elevated. They are debilitating, and they persist well over 6 months to a year. And with prolonged grief or complicated grief, we find that the individual will also experience post-traumatic stress disorder as well as depressive symptoms. So from this, when you see that it's graduating from typical acute grief into prolonged grief, then that can be your time to call for help or seek help. Okay, so if you're a therapist, or if you work in the community, or you're here, you're a sibling, you're a parent, and you're helping someone navigate their grief, what do you need to do? You just need to guide that sense of reorganization with calm curiosity. So, not finding areas of blame, but just being curious about where they are with their grief, being curious about the entire system. If it is a family that you're seeing, if it is a family that you're supporting, are you able to help them observe the patterns that they're using to cope, those coping patterns? So helping the system, helping the family, helping the individual to be able to step back and identify some of the roles that they have assumed automatically, perhaps establishing who are the distancers. We talked about the distancers, the pursuers last week, the overfunctioners in the system, the underfunctioners. So helping the system or the family or even yourself to be able to recognize, okay, which role am I playing after this death happened? Am I the hero child? Am I the lost child? Am I the identified patient, aka the black sheep of the family? But it is also important for us to be able to help people foster open communication that is safe, So not pushing the system, the family, or the individual to express their emotions in a way that would lead to cutoffs, especially when we're dealing with a family or a couple, or even siblings. So if they express their emotions in a way that is maintaining or is assuming a blaming stance, we find that members of the system might be triggered into cutting each other off. Instead, invite members to talk about the needs, the issues behind their feelings. Remember, an emotion like anger is a secondary emotion. So that's what we are seeing on the surface. But what is really happening underneath? When we're looking at that iceberg, like in the beginning. So is it that it's showing up as anger, but underneath, we are really sad, We are really in fear that another member of the family might die, Yeah, so and what is the need when they're angry or when they're experiencing this sadness? What do they really need in that moment? Do they just need us to sit and listen? Do they need us to sit in silence with them? Yeah. So helping the system, helping the individual to be able to find safety so that they can openly communicate what is really going on with them. But we also talked about grieving patterns, assuming or following intergenerational patterns, So if you're working with someone or you're supporting someone, it is important to just look beyond the acute event. So looking at the illnesses in the family, the deaths, the losses that the family has suffered, and how the different generations dealt with them. And this can allow the system or an individual or a couple to be able to normalize some of the experiences that they are having. But with the awareness that comes with mapping these intergenerational patterns, is that it would then allow them to choose the points where they can be able to cut off these intergenerational patterns that are not serving them. So if you go to therapy, your therapist will be able to draw a genogram with you. So 3 generations looking at the different patterns and how they're being passed down. And then now it is your responsibility as a client to exercise your power by deciding where will I or what can I do to cut off some of these patterns that are not serving me or are not serving my family. Okay, so before I read this beautiful write-up that I have, since this will be our last slide, I wanted to briefly mention the 5 pillars of wellness. That is very critical, whether you're going through grief or just through life or navigating mental health challenges or other stressors in life. So research has shown that for one to be able to stabilize themselves, or even for a therapist to stabilize someone, we need to work on these 5 pillars of wellness. So the first one is healthy eating. So are you eating a balanced diet? Are you trying to eat 3 meals in a day? The second one is observing sleep hygiene. Are you able to get in enough hours of sleep? So for 18-year-olds and above, we need to sleep for at least 6.5 hours to 9 hours. For children, then they need to sleep for 9 hours. Yeah. The third one is physical fitness. Are you able to move your body? And if you're not able to access the gym, in fact, research shows that we need 150 minutes of physical fitness, preferably out in the sun. Yeah? So, what are some of the things that you can do to move your body? And there's a writer, I can't remember her name, who says that the opposite of depression is dance. So, dance generally for me is movement. And remember, depression and grief, yeah, they are comorbid, they co-occur together. The fourth pillar of wellness is healthy coping. So how are you coping with your grief? How are you coping with the stressor that is present in your life currently? And by healthy coping, do you have someone to talk to? Are you perhaps working out? That is also a part of healthy coping. Are you able to journal? Are you practicing mindfulness? If you're a person of faith like Vicky, are you able to exercise your spirituality in coping with the stressor in your life? And then the fifth one is not ignoring your substance use or your mental health challenges. So if you notice that you're perhaps using substances more, you're drinking more after a death, or you're struggling with a lot of anxiety or other mental health issues after a death, what are you willing to do about it? Not to ignore it, but to work towards it. Yeah. So there's something I wrote here. Allow me to read it. So the journey towards healing, integrating faith, community, and time. So grief is the form love takes when someone dies. It is a testament to the depth of our connection. Faith and therapy are not at odds, they are partners. Finding solace in God is powerful, but seeking psychological support honors the mind that God gave you. Healing is a communal responsibility. We must become a society that supports not just the grand send-off, but the quiet, lingering days that follow. If the loss is permanent, then so is the grief, but it changes its form over time. Please note, I did not say we get over it. No, it changes its form over time. We grow around our grief. You should not sit and wait for Judy to go back to the person they were before the death occurred. Because when the death happened, a part of you also died with them. So we grow with our grief, we move forward, we don't move on. Yeah. And we have some references over here. And yeah, for any questions or inquiries, or for anyone who would like to book a session, these are my contacts. I also do a lot of psychoeducation on YouTube, and the channel name is Judith Epereje. You can also follow me on other socials on the name Serendipity MFT. I will also be running a grief support group starting the last week of August. And I think I will share the poster and the Google form link in the chat for your consideration. So allow me to end my presentation there. I hope you're able to learn something and that it resonated with you. And lest I forget, I am hoping that you share on the chat what you lost when your loved one died. Thank you. Vicky, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. That was really amazing. Great lessons there. Really depth. I love what you have done with a lot of things. I love the what do I call them? The diagrams, how the presentation looked like. The poem, allow me to call it that, at the end. I didn't know you're such a poet. I mean, really good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a way of coping. It's a way of coping.
Oh, it's amazing. It's really good. And even the 5 pillars of wellness, among other things. That was really, really, really good. And I pray that for participants, you have picked something that you can be able to start this journey of healing with and continue. Maybe you have started, but just a way, a pointer, to point you in the way to go, and knowing that you're not alone. And seeing yourself in some of the presentations, some of what she was talking about, and then also being able to now know, so then what do I do? Now that I'm here, then what do I do? So thank you so much, Judith. And so we'll start with the question she asked. And this is a moment where you might feel like your brain is like, I don't want to engage. Where are they making me do this? I don't want to engage in this. And before we go to the questions, the question Judith had asked was, when the person died, what did you lose? Who did you lose? Because the person is not just the person. We have what we call secondary losses in the loss of the person that you lost, the person who died. So we can answer that, and then we go to the Q&A part of the workshop. So feel free to put it in the chat. Moraga says Judith is a mindful poet. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you brought mindfulness. Mindfulness is being present moment when you're dealing with, what am I feeling right now? What is happening to me right now? What am I doing right now? We'll do a small exercise on that when we finish answering the question, and then we get to the Q&A. So Elizabeth says, I lost purpose, direction, and a sense of belonging. Yeah, sorry Elizabeth. That feels like your identity completely just, you're like, so who am I now? Where do I belong? Who am I? Who am I belong? Who do I belong to? Yeah, and that's normal in grief. Somebody else? Joyce says, I lost a friend. Yeah. I'm sorry for your loss. Emily says, I lost my confidant. Sorry, Emily, for that loss. Yeah. You can have 2 more, and then we will do the mindfulness activity.
I think I can also share what I lost.
Go on.
When my dad died, yeah, Torres Martin is my brother. Yeah, when my dad died, I lost my safe person. Yeah, and we were talking about safety last week. Yeah, but he was my go-to person, so I lost one of my 5 safe people.
Yeah. So again, what you're saying is that apart from the many other roles and responsibilities and parts that your dad filled, plus those ones, you personally, especially in the death of your dad, you lost your safe person. Yeah. Sorry for your loss as well, and Taurus, for that loss. Right, maybe we'll have one more, and then we will get into the mindfulness activity. Susan says, I lost stability, and the person who saw me and loved me for me. Sorry, Susan. Yeah, there you go. So in answering this, you realize that the person really carried a lot more than just the person that they were. And so there are many. So in one grief, you have multiple griefs in one grief. So you grieve the man, the woman, the person that this person was, and then all these other secondary losses. Yeah. Lillian says, I lost my pillar, my best friend, and smiling seems like it's too much work. Yeah. Sorry, Lillian.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mary KI says, I lost my schedule and my pillar. Sorry, Mary. And thank you. Thank you for trusting us with your grief. Thank you for sharing. Judith, do you want to say something before we go into the mindfulness activity?
No, I just honor the strength. You know, living in a society where we've been told that expressing our emotions is weakness, or even just having grief conversation is weakness, I honor the strength that I see on the answers, Yeah.
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 All right, thank you. And so what we want to do, just to practice some mindfulness, I want you to look for something that you can touch and feel. I'm trying to see on the table what I have. Something that you can touch and feel. So I'm giving you a minute to get the thing. Okay. So once you've gotten the thing, if you can't get anything near you, you can touch your hand. Yeah, you can touch your hand. So mindfulness means present moment. What you're doing at that particular minute. So what I want you to do with the thing that you've gotten that you're touching, I just want you to close your eyes and then allow just your sense of touch to speak to you about the thing that you're holding. Just feeling whatever it is that you're holding. If you're touching yourself, allow your fingers to feel the contours of your fingers, of your hand, the rough places, the knuckles, without thinking about anything else. Try to block out all that other noise that is in your head. And just allow yourself to appreciate the thing that you're touching and the sense of touch that you have. Don't ask questions. It's present moment. It's about you and the thing that you are touching. We are closing our eyes so that you're not distracted and be tempted to go looking around. So for just about 30 seconds, allow your hands to interact with what you're touching and appreciate what you're touching. How does it feel to your hand? Which parts are rough? Is it hot? Is it hot? Is it cool? What do you appreciate most about, the thing that you're touching? What do you appreciate most about your skin? And then what comes to mind that is good a good thing that comes to mind when you're relating with what you're touching. Maybe it is the color of what you're touching. What's something good can you think about? Something good. So you have to force your mind to focus. Okay. And I just want you to hold it in your hand and just squeeze it a little bit. If it's squeezable, my pen is not squeezable, so I'm going to my hand. And allow yourself to feel that squeeze. And count of 2 will be stopping. And 1 and 2. So stop what you're doing. How was it at first? Was it easy to focus? Or were you trying to focus and your mind is thinking, what noise is that outside there? What is happening to my toe? Oh, I feel like scratching my neck, Was it easy to focus? And oftentimes you find that it isn't. But present moment, you have to keep turning your brain, returning your mind to what you're doing. This includes eating. It includes drinking water. It includes the exercise. For example, when you go to eat dinner tonight, I want you to practice that. When you look at the food, appreciate the colors. Sometimes when you eat and you're not even seeing what you're eating, you're just so busy here or you're eating like this. You're with your phone and you're eating. But just put the phone aside. Appreciate that food. See the colors. And the smell that comes from the food. I'm not talking about sniffing your food, but I'm just appreciating that aroma of the food that comes. Then as you put your food in your mouth, and allow your taste buds to bring out the different tastes and how they all mesh together to this beautiful food. And you find that after eating that way, you appreciate and you feel better. As compared to when I'm eating, I'm looking around, I'm watching things, I'm on my phone, I have walked, I have gone. By the time I come back, sometimes I even get a stomachache. Because there was too much air as I was busy putting the food, and I'm not even chewing the food nicely. That is what is called mindfulness, present moment awareness to the things that we are doing. You find that a lot of times we do things autopilot. And so by the time maybe you've left home, you've gone, you don't even notice that a flag has been put up next to your house because you're just autopilot. You get up, go, come back, and you're not looking around you. Allow yourself to continue looking at things around your house, around yourself. That is how you'll also be able to notice some of the things that are going on with you, even through this grief journey. It is a journey and it is a process. And so, allow us to get into the questions. There was a question here earlier. And Joyce is asking, I have a question. How do you deal with family members who are always hurting you? It is 3 months since Dad rested, and my few aunties are up and saying that we didn't grieve as their wish. Do we cut them off? Judith, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I think I could go first because this reminds me of the conversation we had last week about differentiation and a system that is rigid vis-a-vis a system that is fluid. In a differentiated system, we see that members are able to grieve individually, so choosing your ways of grieving, as well as coming together as a family and grieving as a family. So communities as well as relatives and other members of the family can try to, influence how we grieve. But grief is both a personal as well, or an individual as well as a communal, concept or process. So if a system is differentiated, we do not need to cut anyone off, but we can put boundaries, clear boundaries that are required for a differentiated system in how we grieve, and perhaps communicating this with them. And if you're not at a place where you can be able to communicate that with them, then just honoring your grief in a way that works for you. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who knows how you're grieving at night. Remember, we said community can both be a risk factor as well as a protective factor. Even spirituality, in how we grieve and show our grief to the world. So it can be really hard to silence the outer chatter of what we should do vis-a-vis what we shouldn't do. But communicating clearly that this is how I choose to honor my grief, this is how I choose to go through this process. And sometimes not even communicating to them about it, but just looking at that as silence. So not cutting them off, but placing clear boundaries about, this is my process as Judith, this is our process as a family, this is the process as a community, but I'm choosing to do it my way. And remember, 3 months is, even with therapy, we say that with grief therapy, you need to go to therapy at least after 3 months. Because before that, remember, the brain is still in a sense of existential threat. So it's not really able to process what is going on. So honoring yourself by allowing yourself not to be dictated by another person's process, but just honoring your own process. So silencing the outer chatter, drawing boundaries where it is possible. And where it is not possible, just focusing on your grief work in a way that works for you. I don't know if that was clear, but Vicky, perhaps if you have something.
I think you have said it. And the boundaries may look like, boundaries could be emotional, they could also be physical, where if you're able to remove yourself from that space, then give yourself that space to be away from them. But like Judith has said, you have the right to grieve your loved one as you would want to grieve them. And if somebody is coming in their way, give yourself the permission to do what you know is right for you, so that you're able to honor your grief in the best way that you know possible. Then there was another question. Jacqueline says, as a person who used to be a strong believer and after loss, not wanting to even go to church now, how do you deal with the loss of faith? Maybe I could go on that one. Grief affects all facets of you, and I think Judith mentioned it. Grief affects every part of you. Your mind, your thought patterns, your body, your sleep patterns. It affects how your body is showing up. You get heart palpitations. You get either you're overeating or undereating. It also affects your emotions. You either become too emotional or you're numb. You're not able to even figure out what's going on with you. But also, it also affects your spiritual part, because we say that when the soul is grieving, it's like it's in the wilderness. You could get angry, or you might be angry with God. Where was he? How could he allow this to happen? And the same way you're processing the grief as we've gone through all these 4 weeks, even spiritually, talk to God about it. Tell him, what you're thinking. Tell him what you're feeling. And then allow yourself to integrate back to the faith slowly by slowly. It will depend. I don't have a lot of context, Jacqueline, so I don't know whether you used to go to church with the person or this is your own church, but now you don't want to go. But again, it's a journey that you do a step at a time. As you're integrating, you're looking at the 5 pillars of wellness, spiritual part is part of it, especially your personal faith, because this is something, faith is something that really anchors you. And so talk to God about what you're feeling. And talking to God sometimes is just going there and saying, God, here I am, and just cry. He understands, he hears, he sees those tears, and he understands what you're saying. Sometimes it's just calling him for a meeting and saying, hey, God, I really want to talk to you. And sometimes we do what we call the empty chair with God. You're like, God, sit here, let's talk. How I trusted you to heal my person. How could you allow this to happen? He's a big God, he can take whatever it is that you want to tell him. There is no shame, there should be no fear, because he already knows what it is that you want to tell him anyway. So go ahead, have a meeting with him and let him talk to you about what happened. And after you talk to him, allow him to talk to you. He'll talk to you through music, he'll talk to you through his word, He'll talk to you through, the community that of people of faith that you may have put around you. He will talk to you through past experiences that you have had, where your soul was in the wilderness and he's bringing it back to him again. He will talk to you in whatever ways that he knows that he can get you. So this is normal, and this is because of the loss. And this is because of even the loss of the expectation that you expected God to do something about that death, and he did do it. So as you're doing all that, forgive him. In grief spiritual therapy, some of the psychologists talk about, forgiving God for whatever you think he did not do or he did. And then from there, start conversing and engaging him. And then let him deal with whatever pain you have spiritually. But this is normal. But like all grief, what we are saying is that you don't get stuck at not going to church. Because again, when a year, 2 years, 3 years passes, then again, reintegrating back your faith becomes another loss. And it becomes harder. So talk to him about it. The way we are talking here now, just have a go with him and let him fill up those gaps that you could have. And this is psychological, spiritual. A preacher will tell you, oh, you don't question God. I don't know God. But then I'm like, if he's my friend, if he's my friend who's closer than a brother, why am I hiding from him? And he already knows what I'm hiding anyway. And so psychology spiritual says that, have a conversation. The same way we have had all these other conversations. Talk to him about what concerns. It's not questioning him, you're not questioning his sovereignty. You're just seeking to understand, what happened. Help me understand. Help me come to a place of comfort. I am angry at you. I feel like you let me down. That kind of a conversation. It's not cussing. I'm not saying cuss God. I'm just saying having a conversation. Jacqueline, I don't know that helps. I hope it does. Judith, anything you might want to add?
Yeah. From my clients, the thing I learned about the spiritual struggles that come after death, sometimes it stems from not having that safe person to talk about these things. And even last week we mentioned about someone being very stoic in their faith, and like family, church members telling you that, it was the will of God. You cannot question God, just what you mentioned. But what I see working for my clients is just allowing that process to happen, just like therapy is, and finding that safe person that you can have this conversation with, that this is what I'm really feeling. I'm really angry towards God. I'm really angry towards this death, and I can't even find myself going to church. Remember, healing grief requires that vocalization, but it also requires a witness. So that witness could be a therapist who's supposed to be a secure attachment figure. So going to someone who will not judge or question, those expressions of disappointment in God or anger towards God. And even as you keep processing it, not just sitting with that anger towards God, but how do you process that? Is it perhaps journaling, writing those letters and being very honest about the anger towards God and what you're mostly angry about, So finding ways to process that anger. And remember the third task of mourning, where we were talking about adjusting to a world without the deceased, and it required that spiritual adjustment. So reconciling this conflict, which could be a psychological thing, an emotional thing, but also just the spiritual part of it, but also exercising that self-compassion that, it's okay. I'm really struggling right now. I'm angry at myself. I'm angry at my loved one for dying. I'm also angry at God for perhaps letting me down. And I'm angry at the world, So that is your process. Allow it to just take precedence. And at some point in time, it will get easier for you to even go back to church, go back to the mosque, and just face that part of yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll go back to Judith. You shared a Google form link. Is that
Yes. That is the Google form in case someone needs to be part of a grief support group. Yeah, so sometimes when grief happens immediately, we are not able to go to therapy, or if therapy does not work for you, finding a community of people who have a lived experience with grief could really go a long way. So click that link, perhaps share it with someone who might need it. But also in the posters that we were sharing, you could find my number or Vicky's number, and then you could be able to get the help that you need.
Yeah, and then I'm also sharing. I go to Reduce Baptist Church. We have a counseling team there where we have students from various universities that come to do practicum at the center. And so, in case you know somebody who really needs grief therapy and they may not be able to afford it, I'm sharing that number. Our the church secretary's name is Carol, and that's the number. So if you call her, you'll be then assigned a counselor, a psychologist, or a marriage and family therapist who can just be able to assist you go through grief. And remember, when grief is happening, life is also happening around you. Life has been happening. And so grief comes to it just adds on to some of the burdens that you have to carry and emotional injuries that you get. So in case you know somebody or you're here, if you're able to pay, it would be good to work. Well, if you can't pay, Judith and I, we may not be able to do free therapy. We will charge. And so you can allow the other, somebody else who can't pay, to go to Rejoice with that number that I've given. If you're able to join a support group, are you charging, Judith?
Yes, I'm charging 20,000 for 80 weeks, 2 hours per week.
8 weeks or 80?
8 weeks. Okay. So 20,000 for the 8 weeks, 7 to 10 people. So it will be a closed group.
Okay.
Yeah, so we start and finish together. Yeah, from the last week of August.
All right, so there you go. And then we are on social media, track us there, share with friends. Anytime you feel like you need to clarify something, all this stuff is going to be on YouTube, on Judith Federege's YouTube channel and Vicky Kedemi's YouTube channel. You can just go there, share with somebody, invite somebody there to just go through. The beauty of that is that all this we've shared is going to be there. So that when you feel like, what did she say about this, you can always just go back there and look again and check again and be helped. So we are so thankful for your time. Thank you for being with us all these 4 weeks. In the future, we might do other collaborations of different topics. July is a very busy month for us, so we may not be able to do anything in July. But look out on social media, TikTok, all those platforms, and you will see something. Probably, I don't know, maybe August or September, we might be doing something else together just to bring awareness. And some of the things we do we might charge, but some of them might be free. And we are thankful for your time. And we pray that going forward, you will pick something. So as we sign out today, we have just for 5 minutes, as you sign out with just one thing that you have picked, and you've told yourself, no, I want to do that one thing for yourself in this journey. As you sign out, please, just one thing. Even if it's just hugging yourself every morning, or I don't know, something that you have decided you'll do for yourself in this journey as you sign out, and we are thankful. Judith, maybe you can say your goodbye as our people sign out.
No, I am deeply grateful for each and every one of you. And yeah, keep honoring your grief. It's not about any other person. Your loved one deserves your tears. They deserve you mourning and grieving them in the best way that you know how. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you too. So I'm waiting for those messages before you go. What's the one thing Just one or two. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Susan. And Nancy, the one thing you do for yourself as you sign out.
And you can unmute and just say the word as you sign out.
Alright, so Moses says, thank you for the framework of grieving. Sincerely appreciated. You're welcome, Moses. Joyce, thanks for the journey. Have a lovely time. Thank you. Emily, I will grieve as long as it takes, and that's okay. Thank you, Emily. I will acknowledge my grief. Mary says thank you. And as you put it there, feel free to sign out. Signing out meaning, now you can log off. Yeah. Thank you, Anne. And Mary, asante sana. I will eat a balanced diet and take walks when I feel overwhelmed. I will honor my grief as long as I can. Say, Susan. Thank you, Susan. Just one thing. Just one. Including I will sleep, I will move my body, I will dance, I will try to smile. Lillian says I learn how to smile in my grief and embrace this journey gracefully. Thank you, Susan. And we wish you all well in this journey. Yeah. Okay, we have 10 more minus us, so 8 more people. Joyce says, I am committing to be present and to feel the feelings. Amazing. Thank you, Joy. Charity says, thank you, Judy and Vicky. I really helped. I will honor my grief and dance more. Great. Go for it, Charity. Go for it. Yeah. We have 4 more. Brenda Pereje.
Oh, these are all my family members.
Alright. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I hope and trust and pray that Brenda claims your relative as well.
My sisters and my brother.
All right. Clear, Taurus, that this journey, even as you see your sister going through it, that somehow you've picked a thing or two that can help you in the journey. I don't know what losing a dad looks like. And I can't even imagine that it's been an easy journey. But I'm glad that one, you have each other. Yeah, that's really, really, really great. Many families, when especially the death of a father happens, is that they disintegrate and then they start fighting one another. And some very ugly characters start emerging. And that makes grief even more complicated. But you have power. You have power in your love together as siblings. Amazing. And we pray that this journey will continue, the process will continue, being able to move forward. And so Brenda said that there's a message. And I will honor my grief by doing what my dad did best, loving and giving back. Go for it. Go for it, Claire. Amazing. And thank you so much for coming to support your sister and supporting me as well as we did this workshop. We appreciate your presence and we cannot take it for granted. Yeah. Right, so we can pray with your siblings and then we can call it a night